Welcome to QB Connect. I'm Darin Slack, your host, and today I've got my son Michael with me. Michael, how's everything going?
Everything's going great.
Good. Well, today, one of the things we're going to be talking about is really important to me, has been for many years, is this concept of QB leadership. Leadership is kind of an accepted perspective that quarterbacks have to deliver or the team isn't going to benefit. So leadership is probably up there in terms of one of the highest priorities for developing a quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's why you look at, quarterback wins or the wins and losses being attributed to quarterbacks more than any other position is because of the necessity of leadership and how they affect the outcome of not just the play of the offense, but also of the team as a whole.
When you're talking about leadership, you got a lot of facets to it. It isn't just...
Which, by the way, I don't agree with. I don't think that it should be a quarterback stat, but I think that's why it's attributed that way, is because that leadership is such a prominent part of the position.
I think winning and losing is a team stat, obviously.
Right.
I think leadership is reflected not only in the quarterbacks, but in the whole captaincy of the team. Wouldn't you see that as a fact?
Yeah, like usually you would hope that your quarterback could be in that realm of being a captain, a guy that is higher up in terms of the leadership and people that they respect, not just the position, but the player that's playing it in such a way that it would help them to want to play harder, or wants them to be able to do more or more than they thought they could originally because they believe in that particular person.
I think it's true. I think a lot of wins and losses are done backwards. In other words, in retrospect, we look back at the win and we see what made the difference, and suddenly it's quarterback leadership of the seniors, and those two things end up becoming, wow, we need that. We need to figure out a way to put that in a bottle and feed it to our team, right?
Yeah, like when you're talking about playing good football, the big part is it comes down to really a few plays and whether or not your team is disciplined enough, if they're motivated enough, or if they've prepared enough to be able to be successful in those few plays. And usually that's reflected in, more senior leadership, a good quarterback, a guy that's able to help lead the offense well, guys that have been well coached over the course of however long. And so when you're looking at that, that's why I think leadership is so important, is because if you are playing a team that is, relatively your same skill level or a little bit above, it's required that you have those few plays in your favor.
Right. I think when you start to break it down, you have to look at a number of factors, because you said how the team prepares, how the team gets ready. I think leadership doesn't just reflect on the field. It reflects in every aspect of how a player develops and how a player connects with his teammates, how he interacts with the coaches. I mean, it's absolutely across the board, isn't it?
Yeah. So, like in that regard, how does that actually practically work its way out, though? What would you say is like the defining characteristics of what leadership actually would be? Because I know there's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of opinions about that, and there's obviously the cliche stuff that we know. But if you're boiling it down, what are we looking for when it comes from that position in leadership?
Well, we use this definition, okay? Leadership is not telling others what to do. It's helping them see their value to the organization.
So why is value so important?
Well, making someone feel important is always important in any organization you're in. So anybody that doesn't understand their value to the team won't give their best effort. So we've got to create an experience for all the teammates where they understand their role, they understand how valuable that role is to the team, and they understand what they mean to the players that are pulling the strings. And
so you're saying if someone doesn't feel valuable, they're not going to give, above and beyond or be able to push.
Oh, absolutely.
harder.
I think they're going to find a way to get by. What a lot of guys end up doing is they find another reason to do what they do. In other words, they don't like the captains, they don't like the leaders, so what they'll do is, I'm doing it because I want to up my opportunity to get better film to go in the portal. I don't like the coach, so I'm going to play, but I like the quarterback, so I'm going to play for him. So they start to compartmentalize their priorities, and that begins to influence how they play. They don't play all out. They play all out in certain settings, certain situations, as long as it benefits them. And I think this is what we're seeing more of, even if it's not intended. I think we're seeing this as a result of one of the outworkings of NIL, of the portal, is kids are compartmentalizing or siloing their priorities of leadership to increase their value proposition to potential suitors who say, hey, we want you to come play for us or to look better. They're not as willing to take responsibility for things that normally a quarterback should take responsibility for. There was some of that happened this year. So there's a lot of motivational hindrances right now as it relates to how leadership works out. So I think the challenge for quarterbacks is to find a why that's bigger than all of that and continue to make that a priority. I mean, you don't have to go very far back to find some of the best examples of it. Tom Brady, when he was playing, I think probably showed one of the most impressive leadership demonstrations of all time when he left New England, went into Tampa Bay, and convinced a clubhouse full of really good athletes to come together to win the Super Bowl.
Kind of like instant culture change.
I mean, it was just, and that's just it. I think the word you just said is the key. They're culture influencers. They're cultural catalysts, as I've heard the term used. They're catalysts for culture change. And as a result, they affect the attitude of the whole team very quickly.
Well, so I think, culture and value, I think, are two terms that are used a lot, but I don't think they're understood very well, or they're overused. And so they kind of lose their meaning when you use it a lot. So when we're talking about helping people see their value, what does that actually mean? Because I think when you look at that, it's like, oh, you're valuable, man. Great job.
You're a great guy.
Yeah, like awesome. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually going to feel that on a level that we're talking about. And then when we're talking about culture, what are we talking about there? Because that also is a kind of a ambiguous term that people use a lot, but it's like, I don't really know what it means, but it sounds good.
Okay. Let's break down the first one because it impacts the second. So value is the incubator for culture, in my opinion. In other words, a team that feels its value, the culture will change. But if it doesn't, that culture will also change. So the culture is essentially a reflection of the internal parts feeling their value and feeling important to the organization. So what is value? It's a player understanding what they mean to the other players on the team and to the staff. And that starts not with what a great player they are. It starts with who they are as a person. You know, everybody's different, right? You're different, I'm different. And so there has to be a way for each player to feel that they bring something to the team with their gifts, their talents, their skill sets. And that isn't just on the field, that's in an off-field context as well. So what happens in a typical football program is a lot of teams get very tribal by position. You have the quarterback room, you have the receiver room, you have the DB room, and they have their own culture within that context. You know, the defense can even become its own thing. It always was. I don't even know. I knew all the defensive players on the team. On the offense, you have a different mindset. Again, and that's on purpose because they want to create camaraderie that is within the scope that ultimately expands to everybody on the field. But if you have issues where players can't get along, if you have egos that are too big for the room, then you're going to have a problem. I just heard one basketball coach say recently, it's kind of like the coach asked the players, what are you willing to do to make the other players on the team feel their value, feel important? And really what he was saying was, what are you willing to give up in terms of points scored, opportunities to make the team feel their value? And what that means is it may mean I have to spend a little extra time helping a younger player understand something he doesn't. Maybe I've got to have some mentorship going on. So as a coach, if I'm trying to develop leadership, I'm going to create mentorship programs where players are connected with each other by plan. In other words, hey, seniors, go, here's the guys you're responsible for, go get them. And we're going to each one reach one kind of a thing. And what's going to happen, we hope, is that players will take ownership of that themselves. And they'll say, hey, rookie or amateur or, hey, dude, let's go out and have a drink. Let's sit down and talk about what's important to you. Let's talk about why you're here. Let's talk about what you care about. And they connect.
Obviously, college football maybe in that.
Well, of course. I mean, we're talking college right now.
Yeah.
I'm talking primarily college. I'm sorry, I should have been clear. In high school, it's the same kind of thing. It's kind of like, let's eat lunch. Let's go out and have a burger. Let's do whatever. I think we have to be more careful to realize it's not a buddy-buddy program. It's not a swimming buddy. Really what it is we're just trying to create a context for players to connect outside of their responsibilities. And I think that's when people begin to feel their value. When somebody cares about what I care about as a person, I begin to feel my value. Now, that doesn't mean that we're always going to agree on everything we do. That's not how friendships work. Friendships are when you can kind of be who you are and the people around you accept you. That's kind of what we're talking about here. And so that requires an unselfishness. It requires an ability to listen. It requires the character to recognize you're not the end all be all. And, here's one that I think it requires that we don't talk too much about. It requires humility. I don't know that a lot of teams understand that the true nature of a championship culture is not ego. It's not pride. It's humility. It's understanding that everybody around me is more important than me, and I've got to give everything I can to ensure that they get all they need from me. That's the true essence of the culture that wins, and within every player. But that can't be in just one or two players. That has to be demonstrated. It starts at the top, and it has to come all the way down. So when Nick Saban would influence the players that would come into Alabama, one of the first things he would do is have them over to his house for dinner. He would sit down with the player and he would talk about his dreams and what he wanted to try to achieve and what was important to him in his life. And so that he could get right involved with that young man and help him understand that what he brings to the table isn't just as a football player, but as a man. And he would just begin to influence that young man in his sense of value to the team, to the organization, to everybody involved. And then we talk football. Because what it does is it gives him permission now to demand things of that young man that he wouldn't otherwise be able to do because he's making it happen for him behind the scenes. Not just in his academics or other ways, but he's including him in a way that he's not included anywhere else. He's part of the family. And I think that is the kind of culture influence that everyone understanding their role and value can feel. Now, it doesn't mean we diminish anybody. It just means that we're intentional to encourage relationships among the players that are healthy, that are advancing. That doesn't mean there's never any conflict. And every now and then, a good little swing here and there, yelling at each other, getting after each other is good because it starts to open up a conversation. It opens up a conversation about why they felt that energy, why they felt. So coaches got to be on that, following up, saying, hey, you two come see me after practice. Let's talk. Why? Because we got to find out what it was that's driving this distance, this disagreement. And leadership is those young men saying, yeah, coach, we got to talk. It's owning it themselves. So once the coaches create this culture, this perspective, the players take over and they begin to do it themselves. And that becomes the mentoring that wins championships. I would suggest that the teams that have maybe lesser talent across the board but have this kind of leadership will go farther in the playoffs than even a team that's very talented.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that you're mentioning that I think should be pointed out is this idea of creating connection that helps to have a context for that value, right? It's like if you set an expectation based off of just saying things without the intention to help the person feel that what their value is, then what you get left it with is people that feel like they're being used. It's like they don't feel like they're actually being brought into something. It's just like, hey, you do what you're told to do and you're over here versus, hey, you're a part of something and I want you to feel that you're a part of that in a valuable way. And that I'm also not just trying to get something from you without trying to give anything either. And so there's that level of trying to connect with people in a way that's more than just a game of football that, and it has to also be outside the game of football. And it doesn't necessarily mean just like you can't do it in a practice or outside of that, but like just learning about that person, it would be an example of that. It's outside of the game of football, like you brought up with Nick Saban. I think the other thing with the humility is and making everyone feel valuable. I think it's a story with Tom Brady is one of the things that everyone said about him is that he knew the name of everybody in the building. Like from the janitor all the way up into the top brass, and all the new rookies that would come in have stories of him coming up to them and shaking their hand, saying, "Hey, like glad to have you here." And they're like, "Oh, Tom Brady knew my name," and stuff like that. And so there's a level of just instant feeling valued that this guy that was above everybody else in their mind knew who they were. I think creates an instant level of rapport of, "Hey, I'm valuable here because Tom Brady knows who I am." I think that's important for the quarterback is because regardless of how good or bad you are, there's a level of the position that elevates you in terms of status that, and going to your point of humility is like, you're not above knowing people's names. Like just like right. That's an important thing. And knowing your teammates' names, knowing like kind of at least a little bit about them beyond just the game of football, from the freshmen all the way up to the seniors, is important. And so I think that also changes the dynamic of connecting with people and, like we said, creating value.
And before we get too far, we have to be very clear that no one can do this if they're not worthy of the position they're in. You know what I mean?
That's true.
So if they're not good, they can't be the leader where they are. So it's kind of like your example.
It won't change. It won't affect the belief that they can actually go win football games. They might like you.
Right.
Like they'll enjoy being around you, but it doesn't change the feeling of, hey, we can go win football games with this guy.
It's not going to give you that 28-3 we can come back at halftime thing that Tom Brady was able to bring.
Be a dude.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to be a dude. And that's important because I think the way in which a leader who aspires to be a leader approaches a team begins with their own internal process. It begins with how they see themselves. I mean, if I want to be a leader in an organization, it doesn't mean I have to be perfect and not have weaknesses. It means it might be good for me to know what those are. It might be good for me to know where I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and begin to value those around me that are better at things than me and let them participate, let them give input, but also to shine in those areas that I shine. In other words, leverage my strengths and not try to be everything to everyone. And that's what people want. People don't want the leader to be all things. They want him to be who he is. They want him to be authentic, and they want him to be good. A lot of guys who are trying to be leaders, trying to do too much. I could point to a number of quarterbacks, NFL, college, that are trying to do too much, too fast, especially the young quarterbacks. If you watch the young quarterbacks coming into the league, they're not taking care of the ball. They're trying to force ball down the field, force the ball in a hole. They may have fixation issues. They may just have an offensive line issue. But ultimately, that leads to this perception when they get benched that it's all on them. And it isn't. Never is. It's always a combination of things. These guys are great players. They all got there because they were great players. The problem is that there's a series of things that have to happen for a leader to be put in a winning situation that aren't always the responsibility of the player. What the player has to be responsible for is his own attitude in the midst of that struggle. How he carries himself around the clubhouse, how he carries himself around the locker room, how he carries himself around the staff. So a high school kid who has got a bad offensive line, great receivers, could get very frustrated because he can't get the ball off, to his great receivers. Or the receivers can get frustrated because they're not catching the ball. Leadership isn't never complaining or never struggling. Leadership is carrying yourself in a way where you recognize you have to have patience. You gotta take one for the team sometimes. And, the only time you ever get to see an offensive lineman play is when he fails. I don't think a lot of quarterbacks really think this through, that they're in the middle of a game, they're competing, they're frustrated, things aren't working. An offensive lineman misses a block, which he didn't wake up that morning and say, I want to miss a block today. He misses a block and the quarterback gets throttled. Well, the quarterback's not frustrated at the lineman. He's frustrated at the lack of success of the offense. He could just do something that the lineman only sees. In other words, it's not something you see on television. The ball didn't get thrown to the ground and he just lowers his head, or he's kind of like, gosh dang it, if you just get somebody to block, or to make some sort of comment that immediately can cause issues. And that's the kind of stuff that just, not once, but a pattern of that kind of self-protective behavior can cause problems for offensive linemen's confidence and belief in the quarterback. He starts complaining to the media or to the staff about things not working, not taking ownership for drop snaps or bad balls. I mean, any number of those things that a quarterback isn't willing to do when the pressure's on begins to reflect poorly on his leadership.
Yeah, and I think that opens, players up to receiving, that criticism back in a way that's unhelpful. Like, so unless you are Tom Brady and you rarely make mistakes, if you're getting down on other guys while you're also making mistakes, you're just opening yourself up to getting it right back. And it creates this dynamic where who's going to get more blame now? Oh, well, now that we're blocking, you're throwing interceptions, right?
Right.
Like, so there's a level of competitive blame versus, hey, we're doing this together, and we got to try and figure out a way to try and, move the chains and get in the end zone.
So a leader has to begin with his own perspective. And I think it's always important to keep that in mind whenever I'm wanting to make an observation about anybody around me is that give me a minute, I'm going to make a mistake, just like you did. So it's the golden rule, treating others as you want to be treated, in this sense that when you're a leader, you can't do anything or say anything to anyone else you wouldn't want anybody to say anything to you. And I think that's a good rule of thumb for a quarterback. Say, never say anything about anyone else or to anyone else that you wouldn't want said about you or to you. That is probably the most important starting point for leadership. It's just kind of like a boundary you set for yourself, is that I will never say anything behind anybody's back or about anyone that I wouldn't want said of me, to the media, to the staff, to the players, in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I think that's where humility is important too. It's like, listen, it's okay if you're willing to get on your lineman if you're also willing to receive that from them in a way that's helpful, where like you're right, I got to get after this. I got to get better. There's a level of willing to have that back and forth that's like, you're right, man, I got to, let's improve here.
I think another thing you have to have is you got to bring energy. I think a lot of quarterbacks, because of pressure, because of maybe their personality, they can be a little laid back. They could try to be calm. You're trying to suppress it all. And, you have no emotion. And I don't think that's healthy. I think a quarterback with emotion is important. Managed emotion, I think, is critical. But you need to show energy. In other words, you don't have to be cheering the team on before the game. You don't have to be doing the Drew Brees huddle chant or whatever, but there's an energy you bring to the clubhouse, to the locker room, to the staff that they need to feel. So when you walk into a room, you need to be the thermostat. We talk about that in our camps. There's a lot of quarterbacks that tend to be thermometers when they go into a setting. They let their attitudes rise and fall based on the scoreboard, the attitude in the office, the team they're playing, the situation they're in. They're the backup versus the starter. When in reality, a thermostat sets the temperature, comes in with a can-do attitude, and with an attitude that says, I don't care how bad it is, I'm going to continue to do my best for the team. That's not something you're born with. That has to be managed. That has to be generated in the vehicle coming into the parking lot if you're driving to practice, or coming out of the classroom down the hallway at the end of 7th period. You've got to have that self-talk that says, it isn't about me right now. After you say goodbye to your girlfriend, or after you say, goodbye to that teacher and you're on your way to the locker room, there's this internal conversation you got to have with yourself about what's most important, and it isn't you. And so we got to get our thermostat under control so that when I walk into that locker room, hey, fellas, what's up? Good to see you. Ready to go to work? It's 105 degrees today. Did you bring your sweaters? It's like you're operating with an attitude that says the circumstances, the heat, the wind, the rain isn't going to affect me. I'm going to get this done.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about there is important, is that you don't have to be a rah-rah guy. That's not how I am personally, but there's a level of intentional communication that has to occur as a quarterback that helps to bring that energy you're talking about. And obviously you want to be positive communication in a way that's like, we're moving forward, we're doing something. There's a little bit of energy to it, but it's more intentional communication to address, like you're saying, it's hot. Like, you're not ignoring it, you're addressing it, but there's a way that's intentional communication to, hey, okay, I don't care that it's hot. Let's get better. Or if the offense is struggling and we're 3 and out, like, there's intentional communication to not ignore the problem, but that we're going to get it fixed and we're going to move forward. I think that's the important part to that energy that you're bringing, is that you're not just saying, let's go, guys. Like, I think that's another thing that can be misunderstood by a lot of quarterbacks, is it's not enough just to say, let's go, like a billion times and saying it in different tones. Let's go, or let's go, guys. There's a level of like, you have to like use intentional language to communicate, hey, this is the situation that we're in, and being able to help bring, something, positive to that, or to be able to address if there is a negative where we need to go. I think that's important.
So I'm watching a game the other day, Bucks playing the Chiefs in Arrowhead. It's 61 degrees. It's pouring rain. Bucks were up, but then the Chiefs came back and took the lead late in the fourth quarter. And I'm just amazed at this. I mean, Mahomes is doing Mahomes things. I mean, he is a foul weather player. He loves foul weather. It's just obvious the kid just lives to play in foul weather. But I was interested in Baker Mayfield, because here he's got starting receivers injured. He's making the best of a tough situation. He hasn't thrown the ball well all night. They literally only had like one forward pass completion for like 4 yards in the whole second half, if not the whole game. It was really bad. And they were running the ball pretty well, so they were up, but it was really a tough situation. And the camera's on him, just like, and the resolve you could see on his face. There wasn't any kind of rah-rah going on or anything like that. It was just, I was very intrigued to see what he would do. And he goes out, and he's got Sterling Shepard, who's a really great athlete, one of the lesser, on the roster. He's probably third, really great receiver, but he's throwing dimes. I mean, throwing dime after dime after dime. And he just willed himself into a position where he was not going to be the reason they lost. Quite frankly, the defense laid an egg, but the quarterback he willed them down the field, and they scored, took the lead, or actually tied it, and they went into overtime and lost just on the flip of a coin, because had they won the toss, they probably would have had a chance to go down. My point is, that was a moment, and I think there are moments that every quarterback has to be prepared for. And everything he's done in his life leads up to those kinds of moments where they have to do something that is very difficult and overcome a lot to succeed.
I think an important point about moments is that you don't know when they are and when your opportunities are. So like for guys that aren't the starters yet, or that are younger and are like coming up in this process, I think it's important to note that you never know when it is, or when a coach's mind sees like, hey, this was your opportunity and you missed it. And it's not always communicated, right? So it could be in practice when the starter, he gets hurt, and you get your few reps to be able to come in relief.
Exactly.
You have no idea. And that it could be in practice. And then, that was your shot, and you just blew it because you weren't ready in that moment. And I'm not saying that it's easy. It's very difficult, but this is kind of the mindset you have to set, is that it doesn't matter if it's in practice. It doesn't matter if it's on a field where nobody is. It doesn't matter if it's in high school, college, pros. You don't know when your moments are. And so you have to be ready in every situation for when that moment arises.
So good.
To be able to actually perform. Because the coaches are weird, man. Like you don't.
They are superstitious
a little bit, but there's you don't know when, where their mind jumps, and it can switch very quickly to okay, here's your shot. In their mind, they won't say it, but they'll think it, and then all of a sudden you lost your opportunity because you were talking to a guy over on the side, and you just got called up and you weren't ready. It's
so true.
It's very difficult to be locked into that mindset, but that's what you have to do if you're going to be ready for the big moments. Because if you're not ready in the small ones, you're not going to be ready in the big one.
That's so good. I think that there's a term for coaches in the industry called a signature win. You got to have signature wins. It's kind of like if you're going to coach Ohio State, you got to beat Michigan.
Right.
Or Michigan, you got to beat Ohio State. There's signature wins that are expected of you if you're going to coach at a big-time program. I think quarterbacks have a similar situation. They need signature wins or signature moments, and you're spot on when you're describing how coaches don't tell you when those signature moments come. There are moments in which they're evaluating you, and it's kind of like, and I've done this, I've said, okay, how this kid throws in this series is going to dictate whether he plays more. I've done it.
Yeah.
And I don't even tell anybody. I'm just thinking it. And then the kid does something that draws my attention to his success, or he shows character where, it could have been bad, or vice versa, and it affects how I relate to him.
And you and I are both coaches. We've coached. So there's a level of we're not trying to bash ourselves, but in kind of defense of what we're talking about, when you see a kid over and over and over and over again, you get a pretty good feel for their capabilities. So when we're saying hey, this is that moment, it's there's a level of we're giving them room for another shot is kind of the idea. So it's not it's just a random thing. It's hey, well, the circumstance dictates that, hey, this is his opportunity based off of everything that's happening around. The starter's a little bit banged up. We don't have another guy except for this kid to come in and replace. And he's got a shot to show if he's got some stuff, if he's made improvements, right? And I think that's important for guys that aren't in that starting role. It's just if you're not consistently improving behind the scenes and continuing to grind when there isn't that attaboy that you're getting constantly, when your moment shows up because of some freak thing that happened, you're going to be behind the 8 ball in changing that coach's mind, because those are the moments when the dial starts to shift.
Yeah, I think the greatest example of this in all of football history is Kurt Warner. I think that is probably the biggest one in my lifetime that I'm aware of. I've watched the movie American Underdog. I thought it was very well done. It was a great story, and I'm glad Kurt was involved with it, because I think they did it real justice there. But there's this moment when no one believes he can bring any value to the Rams. Mike Martz is like, forget about this guy. There's no chance. And Trent Green goes down in a preseason game. And they have a decision to make about whether to go with this Warner guy. And they're doing everything they can to create these signature moments in practice. They're pushing him. They're grinding on him to see if he's got the goods. That was the whole point that they were trying to portray in the movie. But I think it's true in life, is that you're trying to poke at the guy to see if he's got the goods to go under that pressure, that microscope, to handle it. And then Kurt goes into the first game, and they portray this image of him throwing I think it was nearly a pick six to Ray Lewis in the first drive that he played in. And he gets on the phone, and Martz tells him, I put you through everything to know that you'd be ready for this moment. So a coach knows how far to push a kid to get him into that situation. But that might be, that might be the greatest coaches. Outcome of all time. Dick Vermeil looks like a superstar for choosing, Kurt Warner, because Martz didn't want him. I mean, this guy played for the Iowa Barnstormers. He didn't want him out of the Arena League. He didn't want anybody like that running his fancy greatest show on turf. And now the guy ends up becoming a Hall of Famer, wins Super Bowl. And I mean, what a story, right? I mean, just a total flip-flop of expectation.
Well, I mean, I think Tom Brady might be a little bit above that, and that, he's the sixth round, and then, he ends up taking Drew Bledsoe's spot due to injury. But I think similarly, it's the same concept. But
it's fair. But here's the thing: I would say Brady's in a class by himself as it relates to his overcoming things, and I would agree with you. I stand corrected.
But it's the same concept.
It's the same principle that nobody thought Brady had any chance. His moment came, and he made the most of it, obviously. And I'm kind of foolish to say that I thought it. But the reason I was so impacted by Warner's story is that he wasn't even in a situation to get a chance.
Yeah, like he was.
I mean, it's not like
he's not coming from Michigan and he's drafted and all that stuff.
That was my point. Is that he was like,
it's even further down.
Yeah,
to
he was grocery store clerk.
Yeah.
A few years before it happened, so it came out of nowhere. Again, the competition can go all day in terms of the worst scenario. For Brady, it was just a perception of whether the guy had any athletic ability or any kind of. Nobody saw it. I mean, he ran a forever 40, in the combine, and Belichick, who just saw something in the guy, gave him a shot, which, that's a big risk to take with only 3 spots on the roster. And the guy ended up being the legend, the GOAT.
But you got to believe that in the reason why Belichick even thought to give him a shot was because there were moments in Belichick's mind of like, hey, let's see if this kid's got anything.
Yeah.
Or here, I'm going to try and push this and see how he handles it.
Well, they talked about that. I mean,
and
he would get after him all the time and see how he handled it.
And so, and kind of bring this back to leadership, if you're not willing to go through these on any level, from a humility standpoint, of being willing to put yourself through this in a consistent basis to be able to be ready for that moment, you're not going to be ready to be able to lead a team when it is your shot. And this is one thing that I talk about with younger quarterbacks is like there's a mindset shift of going from a backup or a guy that is the future to actually being the guy.
Absolutely.
And if you don't understand that mindset shift, or if you have to change that mindset because you haven't already started that process, it can be very difficult. And this is why it takes guys a year or two to be able to learn what it means to be a starter, because it's not the same as, having like positive expectations or like, hey, this kid's going to be pretty good in the future. It's not potential. You have to actually produce. You have to do something now. And if you don't have that leadership mindset of, I've put myself through these moments. I'm ready. I'm keeping myself ready day in and day out. Then when your moment comes, like with Baker Mayfield and that opportunity, or with Brady when Bledsoe goes down, or Kurt Warner, or whatever, like the list goes on and on, then you're not going to be ready to be able to do it for yourself in whenever that opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, it's true. I think there's definitely a need to be positioned constantly by coaches to be ready for that. I think they're trying to do that, but with the portal, you don't even have that. You just kind of hire a mercenary out of the portal, and now you got to find if the guy can play under pressure. And I think we're finding with schools like FSU and others, certain players didn't pan out like they hoped, and others did. I mean, so there is that always that crapshoot in terms of guys that are just coming in off the street to do great things. Dylan Gabriel at Oregon's having a big year, and he's transferred twice. So I'm not saying transfer is the problem. I'm saying there has to be something innate in the athlete wherever he goes to make that impact. And I think coaches have to still draw that out of them, even if it only means I get them for a year or two. And those expectations have to change in coaches, because they used to think, well, I'm going to develop him from the time he's a freshman, and by the time he's a senior, he'll get his shot. It doesn't work like that anymore. You've got to play the best player for your situation right now. And so players have to kind of be in a position where they're ready to go at the drop of a hat. And so as a developer, we have to be much more concerned with getting kids of a mindset to be ready and on at all times. They can't have that mentality that they're not on. So we've got to teach them how to be on when they're around the team, when they're around the players, when they're around the film room, they're on. And it's always a competition. There's not a moment when you're not competing. Have a good laugh with your buddies, have that thing, but lock in when it's time to do your thing, because coaches are watching.
Absolutely.
So I think from a leadership standpoint, we've talked about how the players can get there. We've argued a little bit about who's got the greatest story. I think I don't think there's an argument. I think Brady is probably the best story. I think the biggest distance someone came might have been Warner. But my point is, that's the kind of argument you want to have. And I say disagreements. You want to, who's the best of all time? Well, there's always going to be the Montana Brady discussion because of the time frame they played in. There's always going to be. But my point is, I think the moments end the discussion. The 28-3 comeback in the halftime ended the discussion. The win in Tampa Bay ended the discussion, not because they won, but because of how it was done, because of the amount of leadership it required to create that moment and come through on the other side. And Joe didn't do that. The great ones didn't have those situations. So I think the moment can really play a role in that as well, is making it actually brings the concept of legend online.
Well, and so and we're talking about like the guys that did it at the highest level, but I think it's true that any quarterback that played at the highest level has moments way before that, whether in high school or in college, that we're talking about, of they took advantage of their moment. And so this is for any quarterback that's out there that is like that they see these guys that they're watching on TV and be like, man, like, well, he had it given to him like the whole time. Like, no, every single one of those guys has a story of they didn't get an opportunity, and they had to continue to get better and to push and to do things outside of their comfort zone to put them in a position for when their moment was there. And listen, for some guys, it could have been in middle school football. Who knows?
Right.
But the truth is that to perform at that highest level, there's going to be difficulty that comes with that. And so being able to have that mindset of pushing through it is going to be important and relevant for anyone that is wanting to do this for an extended time. No one gets out of this without having to push through that. I
think adversity is the cauldron or the furnace in which a lot of these things happen that no one sees.
Which, to bring it back to our point of leadership, is like you cannot be a good leader unless you've been tested. If you haven't been tested, and listen, you could have all the potential in the world, but if you haven't been tested in a way that you have shown that you can hold up under scrutiny, you can show that you can hold up under expectation, hold under failure, and be able to come back. If you haven't been tested in those things, it's very difficult for guys to believe in you as a leader. And this is why Brady brings such belief, is because, especially in Tampa Bay, he's been tested in every way possible and has won 6 Super Bowls through that. So, of course, everyone on that team believed that if he comes to this team, they have a shot.
You're right about being tested. Testing is everything, and we can't always create that. So a quarterback on some level has to put themselves through a regimen from a young age to be trained.
Yeah, it starts with testing yourself.
Right. And so I got to be in workouts. I got to be disciplined, self-disciplined. I got to expose myself to tough coaching. not harsh coaching, just tough coaching.
Receive coaching.
Yeah. I got to receive input. I got to create a level of adversity for myself that puts pressure on me to have to respond so that when that moment comes, I'm able to step up to the next level. And I think that also involves the weight room. I got to be in a place where my body's physically challenged by that. I got to have coaches working on my speed and my capability and pushing me in my training. All of those factors play in to the first steps of being tested to getting a player where they got to be. And without that work ethic, this is all for naught. I mean, it doesn't matter if you aren't willing to be there when others aren't, if you aren't willing to be early and stay late, if you aren't willing to go the extra mile literally, none of what we've said today matters. It ain't going to matter a hill of beans because the body will not support what you're not willing to do. You can't fake that, can you?
Well, and I think to your point here is that it's not just, and some guys can get twisted in this, is it's not just one moment. It's a series of moments that you have to continue to pass the test. And this is where I think some guys can over put too much weight into one moment and they get so dejected that they just give up because, I missed my moment. I'm done. It's like, no, like you have more moments coming. You don't know when they're going to be, but you have more moments coming and you have to, and on the flip side of that, they succeed in one moment. They have a great throw and it's a great play and they did a great thing in that one moment that they got tested, and they're like, oh, I'm done. I have passed my moment. It's like, no, you have others that are coming up that you have to continue to pass and be ready for. That if you're not, then you can lose that goodwill just as much as you can gain it if you're not ready.
There's another story here that we're forgetting that's really important. Is Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama, when, here they're playing in the playoffs in the final, and they're playing, I think, Georgia. I don't know who they were playing.
Yeah.
And Jalen wasn't getting it done. Saban benches him for the young man, and the young man goes out and plays horrible. Just doesn't play that great. I mean, takes a sack on 2nd and 20 at the end, toward the end of the game, and then suddenly throws a dime against cover 2 in the void. And they score a touchdown to win the game. And I mean, and Tua Tagovailoa is now on the map. I mean, it was like he made the play that needed to be made in his moment to create the opportunity. He ended up being the starter for the rest of the whole next season.
Right.
And here's Jalen Hurts. Now Jalen Hurts is having to be the team player, be willing to do what's necessary, and then now it gets reversed at the end of that season, and Jalen comes in and is the spark that brings Alabama back. And I never forget the interview with Saban after it was over. I've never seen the man broken up like this. He was in tears over Jalen Hurts' willingness to take the step back in the previous year, but to stay engaged the entire year, awaiting his opportunity. He didn't leave. He didn't run. He stayed in the fight. And when his moment came, he made the most of it. And now he's one of the top paid quarterbacks in the entire NFL. I mean, what a statement of a guy who had faced unimaginable testing of his heart, of his attitude, simply because of a decision the coach had to make, that he felt he had to make with two great players, which happens. They would just happen to be in the same situation, but never doubted for a minute his value to what he had to bring. And boy, what a testament to his faith. What a testament to his character. And I've always remembered that as being kind of a model for what true leadership looks like. It's not about always being the guy that wins the game. It's about always being the guy who's ready for his moment.
And I think this is where it translates to leadership, is that when guys see, this is like an example thing, they see a guy that's been tested and he continues to pass the test over and over again. And he doesn't give up. He stays in the fight. He continues to express and to tell people and bring their value up as much as they can in the midst of those struggles, and they continue to fight. That's something that builds confidence in that player that people want to follow, because they're moving forward towards something. And I think that's another important thing in this leadership thing, is that the reason why we talk about having a why, there's something that you're pursuing in this that allows you to go through that testing and not give up, that people want to follow. You're not just standing around in a circle being buddy-buddy with guys. That's not leadership. There's a level of pushing yourself in this testing towards a goal that is deeper than just, I want to be a starter, or I want to, win a few games. There's something that's beyond that people want to follow, when they seen that guy that went off. So it's like if the guy goes off and he gets incinerated, like blows up, it's like I'm not following that guy.
Right.
But he goes, he gets hit, he keeps going.
I think
he gets hit, he keeps going. That's something that people want to follow.
I think that's something that makes football one of the greatest games, because there's moments every Saturday, there's moments every Friday, there's moments every Sunday where you just see, okay, what's this guy made of? And at quarterbacks, it happens all the time. So it's kind of a thing we all watch to see how a guy's going to respond to that. I think this is where we need to kind of wrap it up, is that confidence that you mentioned, that big why, really becomes the fuel for this entire process, in that the athlete with the proper why. In other words, the right amount of care for his teammates, the love for the game, the love for the work ethic, the commitment to the process, as we call it, passio, the willingness to do what others will not so that others get what they need. That right amount of passion that just seems to be the right mix ends up being that it factor that guys that have it, and those that don't have a nice career and end up in tailgate parties. I think that is going to be the difference maker for kids if they understand what it's going to take. And not everybody has it. I'm not going to say I had it. I'm saying that it takes something very special to continue to play this game at the highest level. That's why there's only about a dozen that are really good at it right now. So at the end of the day, leadership is non-negotiable. You have to have it. You have to have a team around you that can support the culture of leadership. In other words, great players that understand what's at stake and want to go with you. If you don't have that, that's going to be a test, isn't it? I mean, you're going to have to build it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that is another thing that a player has to be tested in, is his willingness to build that. So, if you're a quarterback who aspires to go as far as you can in this game, I just want to encourage you that it isn't going to be just because you're a great player. It's not going to be because you did great things all the time. It's going to be 1,000 defining moments that get you prepared for the one moment we all see. It's going to be those choices you make when no one's watching to do the hard thing that others won't, so that the team gets what it needs when the pressure's on. And what we're trying to say is that there's no one thing that's ever going to make that happen. It's going to be a series of 1,000 decisions you make that no one ever sees that make the difference to that one moment that we all get to celebrate. So best to you in your success and what you're trying to accomplish. If you're a coach of one of these guys, it's going to be very important for you to understand that you want to look for that guy that's doing those things and being in that tested environment and responding, because all of us are going to do it. Michael, thank you for your comments today. We appreciate you joining us on QB Connect today, and we'll see you next time on our next episode.